In the early morning darkness, long before most of Ontario wakes up, a silent fortress sits behind layers of concrete and razor wire, a place thousands drive past without realizing the world hidden inside it. This is Millhaven Institution, once called Canada's most secure prison, built not for rehabilitation, but for containment. Millhaven opened in the early 1970s, born from crisis. After the violent Kingston Penitentiary riot shook the country, the government rushed to build a new maximum security prison, stronger walls, tighter surveillance, smarter design. On paper, Millhaven was supposed to fix what Kingston had broken. But from the moment it opened, a different story unfolded. Reports soon revealed harsh intake beatings, long stretches of isolation, and men losing their mental stability inside tiny concrete cells. Guards walked ranges with tension in their shoulders. Inmates described life as a constant battle against noise, fear, and a system that seemed designed to crush hope one day at a time. And then, barely a year after opening, the impossible happened. On a humid July night in 1972, 14 prisoners discovered a weak point in a chain-link fence. One by one, they slipped under the wire and ran into the dark fields outside. By sunrise, Eastern Ontario was on edge. Police set up roadblocks. Helicopters swept over farmlands. Families locked doors and kept children home as officers warned that dangerous escapees could be hiding anywhere. Most of the men were caught, some within hours, others weeks later, but the damage was permanent. The escape proved the unthinkable. Even Canada's most secure fortress had cracks. Inside Millhaven, everything changed. More surveillance, more lockdowns, more segregation, more pressure. The prison hardened into something closer to a machine, a place where every movement, every sound, and every choice was controlled for both inmates and staff. This documentary is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events, shaped by public records, news reports, court documents, and official findings. Some names and details have been changed for privacy, but the core history, the violence, the escape, the fear, and the daily struggle to survive, comes from real life. This is 24 hours inside Canada's most secure prison, a full day that shows how a place built to prevent chaos ended up becoming a symbol of it. Before we dive in, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe to HfTAchiveCrimes. Every bit of support helps us reveal the hidden truths behind the world's prisons and crime documentaries. Now let's go inside. When Millhaven Institution opened its gates in 1971, it wasn't introduced to the public as just another prison. It was presented as a solution, Canada's answer to a system that had broken down violently, right in front of the entire nation. To understand why Millhaven became the fortress it is today, you have to go back to the chaos that came before it. The collapse of Kingston Penitentiary. For more than a century, Kingston Penitentiary stood as the heart of Canada's prison system. But by the late 1960s, it was no longer the proud symbol the government once advertised. It was old, overcrowded, tense, and dangerously unstable. Complaints about food, living conditions, and treatment had piled up for years, often ignored or dismissed. The breaking point came in April 1971, when frustration and anger inside Kingston exploded into one of the most violent prison riots in Canadian history. Prisoners took hostages, barricaded entire ranges, and confronted guards in a standoff that lasted for days. The riot dominated national news, pushed politicians into panic, and exposed the deep cracks in the correctional system. The message from the public was clear. If Canada couldn't control its prisons, it couldn't promise safety. Something had to change, and quickly. A new vision: build a stronger, smarter prison. In response, the government approved the rapid construction of a replacement facility. This new prison would house the most dangerous and disruptive inmates, including the same men who had challenged the system at Kingston. This prison would be called Millhaven Institution. Unlike Kingston's outdated stone architecture, Millhaven was designed with modern ideas about control. A radial layout that allowed guards in a central post to see every corridor. Heavy steel doors that locked electronically. Fenced yards lined with razor wire and monitored from towers. Strict movement patterns funneled through a single central hub. A capacity of nearly 500 maximum security men, all contained behind a barrier meant to be unbreakable. To the public, Millhaven represented progress, a new era of correctional strength. To prison officials, it was a clean slate. To many inmates, it would soon feel like something far harsher. A cold beginning. Early staff who transferred from Kingston expected improvement. What they found instead was a building that looked clean on the outside but carried the same tensions they had tried to leave behind. In many ways, it was Kingston with a stronger shell. Inside the first months, rumors spread of harsh punishment as new inmates arrived, particularly those involved in the Kingston riot. Court filings and inquiries later described intake beatings, severe injuries, and the use of segregation as a quick solution to any form of resistance. One former prisoner described the experience simply: Kingston didn't disappear. It just moved down the road. That statement became one of the earliest warnings that Millhaven would not be the peaceful, controlled environment the government hoped for. Transferred anger, transplanted problems. Many men sent to Millhaven were already carrying trauma, fear, or anger from Kingston. They had lived through a riot, seen violence, and faced severe discipline during the aftermath. When they stepped onto Millhaven's ranges, they didn't feel like they were starting fresh. They felt like the system had simply tightened the walls around them. With its clean hallways and bright fluorescent lighting, Millhaven may have looked modern, but the emotional climate inside was volatile. Inmates didn't trust staff. Staff didn't trust inmates. And within that atmosphere, every decision carried weight. Guards described the early months as tense from the moment they walked in. Inmates described them as survival mode. Both sides felt the pressure. A fortress built on fear. Millhaven was designed to prevent another Kingston riot. That meant extremely limited freedom of movement, stronger physical barriers between groups, faster lockdown procedures, more surveillance, and heavy reliance on segregation to maintain order. But strict control also had consequences. When you compress hundreds of men who already distrust the system into a tight, heavily monitored environment, you don't remove conflict, you concentrate it. Quiet anger builds. Suspicion spreads. And every small confrontation threatens to become something larger. Millhaven's structure did not calm the system, it intensified it. The intake unit. First impressions that never leave. The Federal Intake Assessment Unit played a major role in how new prisoners viewed the institution. The process was supposed to evaluate mental health, sentence length, risk factors, and placement needs. In practice, many described it as intimidating, rushed, or hostile. A lot of the men who passed through intake carried those first impressions for years. A prison is not just a physical space. It's an emotional one. And if the opening moments feel harsh, the entire sentence is colored by it. Millhaven quickly gained a reputation. The place where Canada sends the men it fears the most and controls them with the least flexibility. Why tensions grew instead of settled. Even though the building was new, the same issues that had broken Kingston began spreading through Millhaven's ranges. Long periods of isolation, limited programming, slow responses to grievances, understaffing in key areas, prisoners feeling targeted or unheard, guards feeling unsupported or overburdened. When a prison is built on the promise of control, everything becomes about control. And when control becomes the priority, communication and trust often disappear. By the early 1970s, warnings were already emerging. Millhaven was not stabilizing the system. It was becoming a pressure cooker. A turning point approaching. No one inside Millhaven could have predicted how dramatically that pressure would explode. But in the summer of 1972, barely 1 year after the prison opened, the entire country would learn that even the strongest walls are not enough to contain desperation. 14 men found a weakness. 14 men slipped through it. 14 men sent the system into chaos. But before that moment, before the headlines and the manhunt, before the fear spread across rural Ontario, Millhaven was already showing the early signs of a fortress struggling to control the people inside it. This is the story of how a prison built from crisis walked straight into another. Millhaven Institution was supposed to fix the failures of Kingston Penitentiary. But almost immediately, signs appeared that the same tensions, fears, and abuses that fueled the Kingston riot had simply been transferred into a new building with fresher paint and sharper fences. Behind the concrete walls, the atmosphere was shifting from hopeful reform to controlled chaos. A prison already under pressure. Months after Millhaven opened, reports of brutality began circulating. Men who arrived from Kingston claimed they were beaten during intake, some so severely they required medical attention. A public inquest later confirmed that several guards faced charges for assaults against incoming prisoners, a historic moment, because correctional officers had rarely been held legally accountable before. One inmate, referred to as John Doe in court documents, became the symbol of these early abuses. According to testimony, he was beaten with nightsticks, dragged across the floor, and left with a fractured skull. His name was withheld from the public, but his story spread quickly through the ranges. If this was how Millhaven greeted new arrivals, men wondered what the rest of their sentence would look like. The message was clear. Kingston didn't end. It changed its address. Life on the ranges, fear, quiet resistance, and survival mode. Inside the units, daily life settled into a harsh rhythm. The ranges were long, narrow corridors lined with steel doors and fluorescent lights that never fully turned off. Every sound echoed: footsteps, arguments, the clank of food trays, the constant slam of metal. The early population included many men with long sentences, violent histories, or deep mistrust of the system. Some were still emotionally raw from the Kingston riot. Others were simply desperate, struggling under new rules that felt stricter than anything they had known before. Guards described the environment as tight-wired. Inmates described it as constant survival. Small disputes grew into larger confrontations. Punishment was fast and harsh. Segregation, solitary confinement, became a routine tool for controlling behavior, even when the behavior was caused by stress rather than intent. A system built on stress and silence. Communication between prisoners and staff quickly broke down. Men complained that grievances were ignored, medical needs were delayed, and decisions about movement or privileges felt arbitrary. Staff, on the other hand, felt overwhelmed by pressure, fearing attacks or coordinated resistance. The result was a prison where both sides felt unsafe. Isolation increased tension. Tension increased violence. Violence increased surveillance. Surveillance increased distrust. Millhaven was becoming exactly what it tried to avoid: a powder keg. The first major flashpoint. In the spring of 1971, before the prison was even fully operational, a group of inmates refused orders during evening lockdown. They complained about harsh treatment, lack of communication, and unfair transfers to segregation. The refusal was small, only a handful of men, but the reaction from staff was enormous. Officers rushed in with force. Several inmates were dragged from their cells and moved to solitary. Rumors spread through the units, mixing truth and fear. The prison tightened its schedule immediately. More searches, earlier lockdowns, fewer privileges. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't even a coordinated protest. But it was the first spark that showed how fragile the new institution already was. Segregation, the dark heart of early Millhaven. The segregation wing quickly became the most feared part of Millhaven. Cells were small concrete boxes with heavy steel doors and almost no natural light. Men could spend 23 hours a day inside, alone, with nothing but the sound of their own breathing. Mental health resources were minimal. Human contact was limited. Time felt slow and suffocating. Many prisoners said segregation didn't control behavior, it broke the mind. For those already struggling, it made everything worse. For those who weren't, it became a threat that hung over every decision. Segregation didn't calm the prison. It pressurized it, the roots of a larger crisis. By the end of Millhaven's first year, the same cycle that destroyed Kingston was fully alive. Anger from inmates, fear from staff, inflexible rules, harsh punishments, little communication, and a system more focused on control than understanding. Millhaven was technically modern, but emotionally, it was collapsing. The conditions created exactly what the government wanted to prevent. Men pushed toward desperation. And in the summer of 1972, that desperation would reach a breaking point. A group of inmates found a flaw no one else noticed. A fence weakened, a plan whispered, a night chosen, and 14 men would test the strength of Canada's newest fortress and expose how easily it could fail. By the summer of 1972, Millhaven had been open for barely a year, but the prison already felt like a tightening pressure valve. Tension lived in every corridor. Distrust shaped every conversation. And beneath the daily routine, the counts, the meals, the censored movements, something deeper was building. The sense that men were losing themselves inside a system that offered no relief. No one knew it yet, but Millhaven was about to face the single event that would define its identity for decades. A quiet day before the storm. July 10th, 1972 began like any other day inside the maximum security compound. Ranges woke to the sound of metal doors. Guards walked their routes with routine caution, and inmates paced their cells or waited for yard time. Nothing in the air signaled that a national security crisis was only hours away. But among a group of inmates, something had changed, quietly, slowly, and dangerously. They had noticed a weakness. A section of chain-link fence near a recreation yard had started to pull away from its anchors. Whether it had rusted, been damaged, or was simply poorly installed was never fully confirmed. What mattered was that the men recognized it before staff did. And once they saw it, they watched it every day, studying guard patterns and testing how far the fence could bend. Opportunity, not rebellion, was the key. These men weren't planning a riot. They were looking for a gap in the system, and they had found one. The final hours of planning. That evening, guards noticed odd behavior across the ranges. A few inmates who normally argued remained quiet. Others who never cooperated followed orders without complaint. In a maximum security prison, unusual calm is just as alarming as open hostility. But Millhaven was still new. Staff were still adjusting. And those small signs were easy to dismiss as coincidence. Meanwhile, the escape group waited for darkness. Nightfall, the fence in the shadows. Just after 11 p.m., the yard fell into near-complete darkness. Only faint yellow lights from the towers cut across the ground. In the cover of the night, the inmates moved. Records later showed that they timed the guards' rotation almost perfectly. When one officer turned to check the far corner, the first inmate slipped through the loosened section of fence. A second followed, then a third. Within minutes, 14 men crawled under the wire and stepped onto open ground, a place no prisoner should ever stand. A guard in the tower didn't notice at first. The field looked empty. The shadows looked normal. Then something moved, a flicker near the fence line. The guard leaned forward, squinting. Another shape appeared. Then another. He realized the truth. He hit the alarm that came too late. Sirens erupted across the compound. Lights snapped on. Guards rushed to the yard, shouting commands into the darkness. But the fugitives were already sprinting toward the tree line beyond the perimeter. Their silhouettes cut across the grass, small and fast, disappearing into thick blackness as helicopters and search teams were mobilized. Millhaven, the prison built to prevent another disaster, had been breached. Ontario wakes to a nightmare. By sunrise, news of the escape spread across eastern Ontario. Radio stations repeated urgent warnings. Police checkpoints appeared on highways. Families locked their doors and kept children inside. Farmhouses miles away reported missing food, footprints, overturned tools. The fear was real. The unknown was worse. One woman from a nearby town later recalled the moment her young son ran inside and said he had seen a man hiding behind a shed. When she opened the door, she saw him, one of the escapees, exhausted, desperate, and asking only for something to eat. She slammed the door and held it shut with all her strength. The largest manhunt in Canadian history at the time. The response was enormous. Ontario Provincial Police, RCMP, military personnel from CFB Trenton, local law enforcement. Search teams swept through forests, barns, fields, and abandoned cabins. Helicopters traced patterns over farmland. Patrol cars blocked intersections through the night. Some escapees were caught within 24 hours. Others lasted days. A few survived in the woods for weeks, living off stolen food and luck, until exhaustion forced them out. None escaped forever, but the damage to Millhaven's reputation was permanent. Inside the prison, the aftermath. As the manhunt unfolded outside, Millhaven transformed inside. The reaction was immediate and severe. Extended lockdowns, repeated cell searches, mass transfers to segregation, reduced movement, tightened schedules, increased surveillance. Even inmates who had nothing to do with the escape felt the consequences. Guards were angry, embarrassed, and determined never to let such a breach happen again. Administration faced heavy political scrutiny. The public demanded answers. The escape became the moment Millhaven hardened into the fortress it is known as today. The meaning behind the breakout. The 1972 escape wasn't just a failure in security. It was the result of pressure. A new prison designed for control. A population filled with trauma. A system that relied on force instead of communication. A level of desperation that made freedom worth dying for. 14 men did not run because they expected success. They ran because the walls felt too tight, the rules too heavy, and the future too empty. The escape showed the truth. You can build stronger walls, but you can't stop human desperation. This event didn't break Millhaven, it defined it. And in the years ahead, the institution would transform into something even more controlled, more rigid, and more unforgiving. The 1972 escape shattered every illusion the government had about Millhaven. A prison that was meant to replace Kingston Penitentiary's failures had now produced a crisis of its own. 14 men slipping under a fence wasn't just a breach, it was a national embarrassment. And when political pressure meets public fear, prisons change fast. Inside Millhaven, the escape became a permanent turning point. The institution hardened overnight. The era of permanent lockdown. Before the escape, inmates experienced moments of normal movement, yard time, work programs, limited recreation. After the escape, everything tightened. Routines shrank. Free time vanished. Even basic activities became restricted. The prison shifted into a near-permanent state of lockdown, where the first and last sound many inmates heard each day was the echo of steel doors slamming shut. Movement was no longer seen as part of rehabilitation. It was seen as a risk to be managed. Staff walked with a new posture, stiff and alert. Every inmate was viewed as a potential escape risk. Every request was treated with suspicion. The culture inside had changed completely. The rise of control-first corrections. After the escape, administrators rewrote key security policies. Control, not communication, became the backbone of daily operations. Several changes defined this new era. Frequent, unannounced cell searches. Tighter movement schedules. More officers assigned to ranges. Expanded segregation use. Stricter surveillance from towers and control rooms. Reduced interaction between inmate groups. The message was simple. Nothing like the 1972 escape would ever happen again. But the cost of this new approach fell heavily on the inmates living inside the system. Segregation becomes the default tool. Solitary confinement, originally intended as a temporary disciplinary measure, became a central pillar of Millhaven's security strategy. When staff feared conflict, segregation was the answer. When inmates argued, segregation was the answer. When someone requested medical attention too forcefully, segregation was often the answer. Cells in segregation were small concrete boxes with a steel bed frame, dim lighting, and almost no noise except for the occasional echo from down the range. Inmates spent up to 23 hours a day inside, with 1 hour for a small, fenced yard barely bigger than a walk-in closet. Many men who experienced segregation described it not as punishment, but as disappearance. One former inmate later said, "You don't do time in the hole does time inside you." Programs collapse, tension rises. With the prison focused on locking down movement, many programs that were supposed to help inmates, education, work units, training, counseling, struggled or shut down entirely. The system had no space for reform when it was fighting to maintain control. Idle time created its own problems. Men spent long hours in their cells, pacing back and forth, thinking, becoming anxious or angry. A prison psychologist later wrote that the post-escape period saw a dramatic rise in insomnia, depression, paranoia, self-isolation, violent outbursts. The stricter the system became, the more fragile the emotional environment grew. Staff under pressure. While inmates carried the weight of harsh living conditions, guards also experienced growing stress. The escape had embarrassed the entire profession. Officers were expected to be tougher, more alert, and less forgiving. Supervisors increased inspections. Missteps were punished quickly. Every shift felt like a test. Some guards adjusted by becoming stricter. Others burned out. Many transferred to different institutions within a few years. One officer described the period as, "Everyone was waiting for something else to go wrong." Architecture reinforced, trust destroyed. Physical changes were made across the institution. Fences strengthened and re-anchored. Additional razor wire installed. New locking systems added. Lighting improved in blind spots. Movement paths redesigned. Guard patrols increased. Towers upgraded for visibility. These changes made Millhaven safer on paper. But emotionally, they deepened the sense of separation between staff and inmates. For inmates, it confirmed a new truth. Millhaven wasn't a prison trying to rehabilitate. It was a fortress trying to contain. A new identity takes shape. The more Millhaven tried to control the environment, the more the environment produced unintended consequences. Inmates became more guarded, more defensive, more willing to challenge authority when pushed. Staff became less trusting, quicker to use force, and more focused on survival than support. The institution that Canada hoped would symbolize progress instead became a symbol of maximum security taken to its extreme. By the mid-1970s, Millhaven had earned a reputation across the country. The toughest prison, the strictest rules, the harshest segregation, the least tolerance for conflict. Even inmates in other facilities whispered about it. Guards from other prisons used it as a reference point. Families of prisoners feared their loved ones being transferred there. Millhaven had become the place where the system sent the men it feared the most, and the place where those men feared the system just as deeply. The pressure continues to build. Despite all the new restrictions, the tension inside Millhaven did not disappear. It only settled deeper into the walls. Staff expected resistance. Inmates expected punishment. The institution was locked into a cycle where distrust fed more distrust. Millhaven had survived its first crisis, but it had not solved the problems inside it. Instead, it had learned to live with them. And as the years passed, the prison's strict environment would continue shaping the lives of everyone inside, officers and inmates alike. But the story doesn't end here. To understand Millhaven fully, you must see what daily life became under this new system. The routines, the controls, the quiet battles happening behind every steel door. A full day inside Millhaven Institution is not measured by hours. It's measured by noise, routine, and the constant awareness that something could go wrong at any moment. After the 1972 escape, Millhaven rebuilt itself into a tightly controlled environment where every minute was structured and every movement monitored. To understand the pressure of living in Canada's most secure prison, you have to see how one day unfolds from behind the walls. 5:30 a.m., the wake-up call. Before the sun rises, the prison is already awake. Heavy steel doors rattle as guards start their rounds. Keys jingle, radios click, and the first count of the day begins. Officers peer through cell windows, confirming that each inmate is present, breathing, and not attempting self-harm. The sound is unmistakable, metal sliding, footsteps echoing, and the slow, cold rhythm of a system beginning its daily cycle. For inmates, the day starts with the same question as yesterday. What kind of day will this be? Quiet or dangerous? 6 a.m., breakfast in silence. Food trays slide through the slot of each cell door. Breakfast is simple and often bland. Oatmeal, powdered eggs, a small piece of fruit. Some inmates eat, others toss it aside. Meals aren't about taste, they're about maintaining routine. In many prisons, breakfast is a time to talk. In Millhaven, silence dominates. Men eat alone, the sound of cutlery scraping metal the only communication between the ranges. 7 a.m., morning movement. This is the most stressful part of the morning for staff. Opening doors means risk. Officers position themselves carefully before releasing inmates into the corridor. Movement is controlled. A few men at a time, walking single file, watched from all angles by guards in towers and control booths. Some inmates go to medical. Some go to showers. Some simply stand in line for a few minutes before being escorted back. Every second is measured. Every behavior is noted. 8 a.m., programs that never reached their potential. Before the escape, Millhaven was supposed to have educational classes, vocational workshops, and counseling programs. After 1972, many of these plans stalled or disappeared completely. Security concerns always came first. A few programs survived: basic schooling, limited work assignments, occasional group sessions, but most inmates spent much of their day inside their cells. With little to do, time felt heavier. Men paced. Men argued. Men stared at the same four walls until the walls began staring back. 10 a.m., yard time under surveillance. For some inmates, Yard time is the only moment they taste fresh air. The yard is surrounded by towering fences, lined with razor wire, watched from above. Even the sky feels controlled. Some men walk laps in silence. Others gather in small groups, speaking quietly, always watching who else is watching them. Officers in the towers observe every movement. No one forgets that the escape happened from a yard. The freedom of fresh air is overshadowed by the memory of a system that failed once and refuses to fail again. 12 p.m., lunch and another count. As trays are delivered again, the second major count of the day begins. Officers pause at each cell, logging numbers, confirming identities, and ensuring that no one has harmed themselves or tampered with the door mechanisms. For inmates, count time is a constant reminder that the prison controls every breath of their life. Nothing moves unless the staff say so. 1 p.m., the long afternoon. The afternoon is often the slowest and most stressful part of the day. With limited programs and recreation, most inmates remain in their cells. Some read, some write letters, some sleep, some talk through vents to the cells next door. But boredom in a maximum security prison can be dangerous. Small frustrations can grow into anger. Arguments can flare over tiny issues, noise, food, disrespect. Officers walk the ranges carefully, watching for signs of trouble. A single spark can shift the mood of an entire unit. 3 p.m., the tension hour. Historically, the time between mid-afternoon and early evening has been when most conflicts arise. Fatigue sets in. Tempers get shorter. Men begin to feel trapped by hours of confinement. Guards know this. Inmates feel this. The prison prepares for it. Extra officers position themselves strategically. Supervisors stay close. Doors remain ready to be locked without warning. 5 p.m., dinner and lockup. Dinner is another tray slid through the slot. Stew, rice, canned vegetables, bread. The food is fuel, not comfort. After eating, inmates brace themselves for the longest part of the day, evening lockup. Doors slam one by one. Radio chatter fills the hall. An eerie quiet settles over the unit. This is when the mind becomes the loudest. Some inmates distract themselves with TV or radio. Others replay old memories. Some feel the weight of isolation pressing on their chest. 7 p.m., the emotional toll. Officers walk their rounds again, checking cell windows for signs of distress. Mental health issues in maximum security facilities often rise after sunset. The mind struggles when the world shrinks to concrete and steel. Some men pace for hours. Some sit motionless. Some talk to themselves in whispers. In a place like Millhaven, loneliness becomes its own kind of punishment. 10 p.m., final count. The last count of the day is slow and methodical. Officers must confirm every inmate is alive, present, and secure. If a number does not match, the entire prison freezes until the discrepancy is resolved. It is the final ritual of control, the system confirming its grip before another day ends. 11 p.m., the prison sleeps, but uneasy. Lights dim. Ranges quiet down. But no one truly relaxes. Guards stay awake. Inmates stay alert. The memory of the escape lingers in the walls, in the routines, in the silence. Millhaven ends its day exactly as it begins it, with tension, control, and the knowledge that tomorrow will look exactly the same. Millhaven's identity was shaped by riots, escapes, and crackdowns, but the real story of this prison is found in the quiet, repetitive hours that fill every day. A single day inside Millhaven is not measured by time. It's measured by control, the force that shapes every movement, every decision, and every breath inside the walls. To understand life in Canada's most secure prison, you have to follow a full day from start to finish. Morning, count before sunrise. Millhaven wakes before the sun. At around 6:30 a.m., officers walk the ranges for the first count of the day. Cell doors remain locked while guards shine flashlights through the small windows, verifying each inmate is alive and present. For inmates, the day begins with waiting. Waiting for the officer to pass, waiting for the count to clear, waiting for the next sound of metal shifting. For staff, the first count is the moment that sets the tone. If a prisoner doesn't respond immediately, tension rises. If someone is sick or unresponsive, panic spreads fast. A mistake here can shut down the entire institution. Breakfast, movement under watch. Once the count clears, the next sound is the doors unlocking electronically. Inmates exit their cells for breakfast, moving in small groups, supervised by officers positioned at each end of the range. Millhaven's dining routines are short and controlled. Inmates pick up trays quickly. Meals are eaten under observation. Talking must stay low. Officers stand in the corners watching body language. The smallest conflict, even a stare or muttered insult, can trigger separation orders or lockdown. Daytime, programs few, rules many. After breakfast, the day splits depending on the inmate's classification. Some go to limited programs, basic education, literacy classes, vocational training in older years, chapel sessions. But many inmates, especially in the earlier decades, remain locked on their range due to security restrictions, lack of resources, or conflicts between groups. Hours pass slowly. Men pace the ranges, talk through cell doors, read, or lie on their bunks staring at the concrete ceiling. Mental health struggles often grow in these quiet hours. For guards, daytime means constant monitoring, paperwork, surveillance, resolving disputes, supervising escorts, and staying alert for any sign of manipulation or hidden plans. The yard, freedom that isn't free. If the security level allows it, inmates are taken to outdoor yards, fenced enclosures lined with razor wire and overlooked by guard towers. Here they walk laps, lift weights, in certain decades, or talk among their own groups. But even this freedom feels limited. Every movement is watched. Every conversation might be overheard. Any sudden gathering can trigger intervention. Fights happen here more than anywhere else. The yard is where grudges surface and alliances form. Officers remain on edge. Inmates choose their steps carefully. Lunch and midday count. The day resets. Before noon, another institution-wide count stops all movement. Inmates return to cells. Doors close. Officers move through the ranges again. Only when the count clears does lunch begin. Every locked door, every choreographed movement reinforces the same truth. Millhaven runs on control, not trust. Afternoon, tension in the quiet. Afternoons are often the calmest period, but also the most dangerous. Tension builds when men have nothing to do. Boredom, anger, and restlessness can turn small issues into major conflicts. Officers watch for signs. Pacing, shouting between cells, smuggled items, sudden silence. Many assaults and altercations over the years began on quiet afternoons when emotion outweighed caution. Segregation routines, a different world. For inmates in segregation, the day looks completely different. There is no yard with others, no movement groups, no shared meals. Their routine is 23 hours alone, 1 hour in a small, caged yard, meals through a slot, limited human interaction. A segregation day is a test of mental endurance. Some men talk to themselves. Some sing. Some yell at the walls. Others withdraw into silence. Guards perform rounds every 20 to 30 minutes, checking each cell through a small window. They must watch for signs of distress, self-harm, or escalating behavior. Segregation is Millhaven's sharpest tool, and its most psychologically damaging. Evening, brief moments of calm. After supper, inmates may have a short recreation period on the range. They talk, play cards, or watch television if allowed. But even these moments are controlled. Strict time limits. Officers positioned at key points. Enforced separation of rival groups. Consequences for any disturbance. Some evenings pass quietly. Others end with alarms. Final count. Night falls, but the prison doesn't sleep. Before lights dim, the institution holds the final count of the day. Officers walk the ranges, checking again that every man is present. But night inside Millhaven is never truly quiet. You hear, shouting down the ranges, metal striking metal, officers' boots, the hum of fluorescent lights, occasional alarms, doors opening for emergency medical calls. Sleep comes lightly, if at all. The meaning of a day in Millhaven. A day inside Millhaven is not just routine. It is a system designed to manage risk at every minute. Every schedule, every lock, every count is shaped by the memory of what happened in 1972 and the belief that danger can appear at any moment. For staff, each day is a test of discipline. For inmates, each day is a test of endurance. And together, they repeat these 24 hours again and again, often for years. Millhaven is not defined by its walls or its architecture. It is defined by the routines that never end. To understand Millhaven, you must step inside a single range and follow one full day. Not the dramatic moments that make headlines, but the quiet hours that shape how men survive inside a maximum security prison. A range is more than a hallway. It is its own world, with its own rhythm, its own rules, and its own tension that never fully leaves the air. The morning count, order before everything. At 7 a.m., the first sound is steel. Doors rattle, keys turn, boots hit the floor. Officers move down the range performing the morning count, a mandatory routine repeated several times a day. In Millhaven, count is not just paperwork. It is the backbone of security, the moment that confirms no one has escaped, no one has harmed themselves, and no one has harmed someone else. Inmates stand by their doors, silent. The rules are simple. No talking, no movement, no arguments. Breaking that silence can mean segregation. Even small mistakes have consequences. This daily ritual sets the tone for everything that follows. It reminds inmates that Millhaven is built on control, and it reminds staff that any moment of uncertainty can escalate quickly. Breakfast and the first movements of the day. Meals come through a slot in the door or in controlled groups escorted to the dining area, depending on the security level assigned to the range. Breakfast is fast: oatmeal, lukewarm eggs, toast. Food is fuel, not comfort. Some inmates ignore the meal. Others collect every piece. Survival makes people careful with resources. Conversations are quick and cautious. Officers watch for signs of conflict, trades, tension, or coded messages. Inside maximum security, nothing is just a routine. Every movement tells a story. Range dynamics, respect, boundaries, and silent rules. Each range has its own unwritten rules, shaped by the men living there. Respect is the most important currency. Raise your voice too often? People notice. Borrow something and don't return it? Someone will remind you. Try to act like you control the range? You will be corrected. Conflicts rarely explode instantly. They simmer in glances, gestures, and the order in which people move. Officers understand this. They learn to watch the small signs. Groups gathering, long whispers, men pacing more than usual. Millhaven's walls contain people with long sentences, some with life sentences. When time stretches endlessly, even small issues can grow into dangerous situations. Programs, yard time, and the challenge of boredom. Some inmates leave the range for programs, education, basic workshops, or supervised work. Others stay inside all day because of restrictions or disciplinary history. Yard time is controlled, fenced, and supervised from towers. It's one of the few places where men see the sky without bars. But most of the day is spent in the cell. Boredom is one of the most powerful forces in a maximum security prison. It wears the mind down slowly. It shortens tempers. It creates tension where none existed before. A psychologist once wrote that Millhaven's structure did not calm inmates. It simply compressed their emotions into smaller spaces. Officers on the range, authority under pressure. While inmates struggle with confinement, officers face their own pressure. Every door opened carries risk. Every interaction can change the mood of the entire unit. Some officers rely on strict professionalism. Others use humor or calm communication to keep peace. But all understand the same truth. In a place like Millhaven, one mistake can set off a chain reaction. Officers are trained to project confidence, even when they feel none. Hesitation is read as weakness. Overreaction is read as provocation. Balancing those extremes is part of the job. Afternoon friction, where small problems become big ones. As the day passes, tension often rises. Some issues start over something simple: a missed phone call, a dispute about the TV channel, a loud argument over a card game. In a community this tightly packed, minor conflicts can grow rapidly. Staff intervene early when they can. But sometimes the safest choice is separation, moving one inmate off the range to prevent escalation. In Millhaven, avoiding violence is as important as responding to it. Despite its reputation, many officers describe inmates as reasonable when treated fairly. The problem is that fairness is often overshadowed by the weight of the institution, the rules, and the history surrounding it. Evening lockdown. Pressures settle into the walls. As evening approaches, the final count echoes through the range. Doors close. Conversations die down. Radios play softly. The hallway grows still. This is when the psychological pressure of maximum security becomes most visible. Some men read. Some pace. Some talk quietly through the vents to friends in other cells. Some lie awake staring at cracks in the ceiling, fighting thoughts that grow louder in the silence. Officers walk with slower steps now. Their shift is almost over, but the responsibility is the same. Keep everyone alive, keep everyone safe, and keep the range stable until morning. Night in Millhaven, the hours that never end. Millhaven changes after lights out. The noise fades, but the tension remains. Doors clank as officers check windows and locks. Inmates shift in their bunks. The air feels heavier. A maximum security prison never sleeps. It only grows quieter. A single night can feel like a week. A single week can feel like a year. And for men serving long sentences, time itself becomes a kind of pressure, pressing down from all sides. A day inside the range. The real story of Millhaven. This is the part of Millhaven rarely shown in documentaries. Not the escapes, not the riots, not the scandals, but the daily reality. Constant surveillance. Rigid routines. Slow building tension. Invisible battles with boredom and fear. Officers balancing security with humanity. Inmates learning how to survive another day. A prison is more than its walls. It is the sum of all these moments, quiet, repetitive, heavy, shaping people in ways the outside world rarely understands. And tomorrow, everything begins again. By the time Millhaven entered the late 1980s and early 1990s, the institution had been operating under high tension for nearly 2 decades. The escape of 1972 had hardened the system. The lockdown era had reshaped daily routines, and the culture of control first had settled deep into the prison's identity. But behind every rule, every search, every steel door, were human beings trying to survive a place not designed for comfort, only for containment. The weight of isolation. Segregation remained the most powerful tool inside Millhaven. While policy called it short-term, many inmates spent weeks or months in those concrete cells. The effects were predictable but impossible to ignore. Men described hearing their own heartbeat echo in the silence. Others counted cracks in the wall to track time. Some began talking to themselves simply to feel human. Mental health workers later testified that isolation produced increased anxiety, paranoia, depression, emotional numbness, hostility towards staff, withdrawal from other inmates. The prison's design didn't create stability, it created pressure, and pressure always finds a way out. Violence becomes language. In a place where communication broke down and trust was rare, violence became a way for inmates to express frustration, fear, or defiance. Fights broke out in yards, on ranges, in showers, during movement. Sometimes the conflict was personal. Sometimes it was a reaction to long-term stress. Sometimes it was a way to protect oneself in an unpredictable environment. Staff faced the same stress from a different angle. Every shift carried risk. Every decision carried consequences. Many officers became emotionally withdrawn, operating on habit and instinct rather than empathy. Millhaven trained people, inmates and guards alike, to survive, not connect. One guard later said, "You can't show fear, and you can't show softness. If you open that door, the job eats you alive." The psychology of living in a fortress. Millhaven's structure shaped the minds of the people inside. Small things became large. A denied request, a delayed meal, a shortened yard time, a guard's tone, a cellmate's behavior. In an environment where movement was restricted and privacy was minimal, every moment carried emotional weight. People became hyper-aware of noise, gestures, shadows, and routines. Some inmates memorized the sound of every guard's footsteps. Others learned to anticipate searches based on how the lights flickered during shift changes. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The inmate subculture. Inside Millhaven, informal rules developed, unwritten but deeply understood. Respect the ranges. Don't bring trouble to the wrong people. Don't involve innocent inmates in your conflicts. Don't talk too much. Don't trust easily. These rules kept some stability. Breaking them could lead to conflict or isolation from fellow inmates. For many men, the inmate code felt more predictable than the official rulebook. Staff under unending pressure. Officers were not immune to the environment. The constant threat of violence, the pressure to maintain control, and the emotional distance required to do the job created high burnout. Many officers developed coping habits, avoiding emotional attachment, strict professionalism, routine-based behavior, relying heavily on other staff for support. The line between duty and survival blurred. Officers often said they aged faster inside Millhaven. Some left the profession entirely after only a few years. Moments of humanity in a harsh world. Despite the brutality and fear, small moments of humanity survived, proof that even in the toughest prisons, people still find ways to feel human. Inmates helped each other with legal paperwork. Some traded artwork or handmade gifts. A few found friendship or peace in education programs, however limited they were. Others found unexpected comfort in reading, writing, or religious activities. Even officers sometimes showed quiet kindness. An extra blanket on a cold night. A calm conversation during a tense moment. A warning instead of a punishment. These moments didn't change the system, but they reminded people that they were more than their circumstances. Families on the outside. For many inmates, the emotional toll extended beyond the walls. Family visits were rare, heavily supervised, and emotionally difficult. Children grew up without fathers. Parents aged while waiting for their sons to come home. Husbands and wives struggled to maintain relationships through glass windows and short phone calls. For some inmates, family was the only thing keeping them grounded. For others, family became a painful reminder of everything they had lost. A system that wears down everyone. By the 1990s, Millhaven had stabilized compared to its earliest years, but the emotional strain remained high. The institution had become a place that demanded strength, caution, and emotional armor. It shaped everyone inside, inmates and guards alike, sometimes permanently. Millhaven didn't need riots or escapes to be dangerous. The danger lived in the silence, the pressure, and the slow erosion of normal human life. And yet, despite everything, people survived. They found routines, built resilience, and held on to whatever small piece of hope they could find. In a place built to contain bodies, the hardest thing to protect was often the mind. Decades have passed since Millhaven first opened its steel gates, and the prison that once shocked Canada with an escape now stands as one of the country's most hardened and tightly controlled institutions. But to understand Millhaven today, you must understand how every crisis in its past shaped the fortress it became. This chapter isn't about the dramatic escapes or the early violence. It's about the reality of Millhaven as it is now, the routines, the culture, the risks, and the long shadow of its history. From chaos to compliance. The Canada of today is different from the Canada of 1971. Policies changed, oversight improved, human rights standards increased, and correctional staff training became more structured. Millhaven did not stay trapped in the past, but it never fully escaped it either. The early years of brutality, tension, and political pressure left a permanent mark. Staff still describe Millhaven as a place where mistakes can escalate quickly. Inmates still describe it as a prison where the environment shapes your mindset almost immediately. Today, Millhaven is divided into separate units with specific purposes. Maximum security units for high-risk offenders. Special handling or segregation units for individuals requiring extreme control. Assessment units where new offenders are evaluated before classification. Special needs or mental health units for those with clinical requirements. This structure creates order, but it also reinforces Millhaven's long-standing identity, the place where the most difficult cases are sent. A day in modern Millhaven. A typical day begins early. Officers start rounds before sunrise, walking long concrete corridors lit by cold white lights. Every door is steel. Every movement is tracked. Inmates wake to the sound of keys and boots. Those in general population units follow a strict schedule: breakfast, controlled movement to work or programs, yard time under surveillance, and then lockdowns that occur like clockwork. For those in maximum or segregation units, the day is more restrictive. Cells are opened only briefly. Movement is heavily supervised. Interaction is limited. The psychological strain is real, and dozens of reports over the years highlight the mental health pressure of extended isolation. Yet, compared to the 1970s, there are more safeguards. Mental health assessments, use of force reviews, independent oversight committees, updated training focused on de-escalation. Millhaven changed, but it never softened. Technology takes over. Modern security relies less on sheer force and more on surveillance. High-resolution cameras monitor hallways and yards. Central control can lock down units instantly. Communication systems track every officer's movement. Fences now have vibration sensors and alarm grids. Drone detection technology is used to prevent contraband drops. The days of crawling under a chain-link fence are long gone. Millhaven is physically stronger than at any point in its history. Programs and the reality of rehabilitation. Although rehabilitation exists as a goal in Canada's correctional policy, Millhaven's environment still prioritizes safety and control. Programs are available, but access varies by unit and security level. Men with long sentences or high-risk classifications sometimes struggle to participate fully. Instructors and psychologists have reported that the atmosphere of fear and mistrust, built over decades, makes progress slower. Many inmates arrive at Millhaven already carrying trauma, unresolved anger, or mental health challenges. The prison tries to address these issues, but the structure of maximum security often limits what is possible. In this sense, Millhaven confronts a question that has followed it since day one. Can a prison built for control truly offer rehabilitation? Staff life, a career of pressure. For officers, Millhaven remains a demanding workplace. Training is rigorous, and expectations are high. Every shift requires awareness, patience, and the ability to respond to danger within seconds. Many guards speak about gratitude for the security upgrades, better radios, cameras, safer unit layouts, but they also acknowledge the emotional toll. Millhaven is a place where stress lives just beneath the surface, where every officer understands that the wrong decision can escalate into something serious. Compared to the early years, relationships between staff and inmates are more professional and regulated. But distrust still exists, shaped by decades of conflict, escapes, riots, and investigations. Inmates today, stories of hard time. Modern inmates at Millhaven include long-term offenders, individuals assessed as high risk, men transferred from other institutions due to behavior or safety concerns. For many of them, Millhaven represents the end of the line, the place where the system sends people it cannot manage elsewhere. Some work to improve themselves, attending programs, meeting with mental health staff, or trying to maintain contact with family. Others struggle with isolation, anger, or the weight of long sentences. Many describe Millhaven as a machine, a place where time passes but change feels slow. A balance the system still fights to maintain. Canada's correctional system continues to evolve. Oversight bodies report on conditions. Courts review prolonged segregation. Advocates push for humane treatment. Officers push for safer working environments. Administrators push for consistency and order. Millhaven sits at the center of all these debates, a symbol of both the need for strong security and the struggle to maintain human dignity within walls designed to eliminate risk. The prison is safer than it once was, but still intense. More regulated, but still hard. More controlled, but still shaped by the past. A legacy that cannot be erased. The Kingston riot shaped Millhaven's birth. The 1972 escape shaped its identity. Decades of conflict shaped its culture. Today, Millhaven stands not just as a prison, but as a reminder of how difficult it is to balance safety, punishment, and rehabilitation in the same space. For some, Millhaven is where they fight to rebuild their lives. For others, it is where they wait out long sentences in silence. For staff, it is a workplace built on vigilance. For Canada, it is a symbol, a fortress built from crisis, surviving through constant change. The story of Millhaven is not one moment. It is every moment layered on top of the last. And even today, if you drive past its walls at sunrise, you will see the same thing people saw in the 1970s. A silent fortress, holding the weight of everything that has happened inside it. Millhaven Institution is not a legend or a movie set. It is a real place, with real men, real staff, and real consequences that reach far beyond its walls. In this documentary, we followed 24 hours inside Canada's most secure prison, but those hours were built from decades of history. The collapse of Kingston, the birth of a new fortress, a mass escape that shook a province, years of lockdown, mental strain, and quiet moments of humanity that refused to die. This story is a dramatized adaptation based on real events, public records, and documented history, with names and some details changed for privacy. But the core reality remains. When a system is built mainly on control, it doesn't just shape behavior, it reshapes people. Some men leave Millhaven. Some never do. But everyone who passes through it, prisoner or guard, carries a piece of it with them. Thank you for watching this full documentary. If you want more real, research-based stories from inside the prison system, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps this kind of work reach more people and keeps these hidden stories from staying locked away.